Before I start, I have got exciting news to share with you, as I have for the last few episodes. Mark your calendars for CrimeCon Manchester 2025, partnered by True Crime. And it's set to take place on the 27th of September 2025. So CrimeCon UK is going to Manchester for the very first time this year, and I will be there, along with some of the biggest names in true crime, and what will be the ultimate true crime event. Now, whether you've been watching my content from the start, or maybe you've just started binging my content, this is your chance to meet me in person, share your theories, and perhaps even uncover new details behind some of the stories that I cover. I'm beyond excited to meet you all, but I won't be offended if you're not excited to meet me. But apart from me, you have the rest of the whole true crime community there at CrimeCon Manchester, partnered by True Crime, the expert-led true crime channel available across all platforms. So let's make this the most unforgettable CrimeCon yet. You won't want to miss it. I truly hope to see you there, and if you use my code CROWS, you can get 10% off tickets. Now on with the episode. In the UK, we are acutely aware of how certain people can use their apparent trustworthy profession to go about their murderous affairs with impunity, shielded by a mask of respectability and trustworthiness. We need only look at Dr. Harold Shipman, arguably the most prolific serial killer in recorded history to date, who only managed to get to these incomprehensible victim numbers because no one suspected him. But the Dr. Death moniker often associated with him has also been used for a number of doctors, and indeed those of similar caring professions, primarily because it makes for good headlines. Today we're looking at one of these people who in the 1980s and 90s forged a deadly path from Ohio to Zimbabwe. This is the story of Michael Swango, and this is Murder of Crows. Much of today's tale will focus on the Ohio State University Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio. Columbus originated as several Native American settlements along the Scioto River. The first European settlement was Franklinton, now a city neighborhood, and this was in 1797. Columbus was founded in 1812 at the confluence of the Scioto and Olentangy rivers, and was planned as the state capital due to its central location. Named after Italian explorer Christopher Columbus, it officially became the capital in 1816. The city grew steadily through the 19th century as a transportation and industrial hub via the National Road, Ohio and Erie Canal, and several railroads. Starting in the 1950s, Columbus experienced rapid growth, becoming Ohio's largest city by land and population by the early 1990s. Columbus is the capital and most populous city of the US state of Ohio, with a population of 905,748 as of the 2020 census. It is the 14th most populous city in the US, second most populous city in the Midwest after Chicago, and the third most populous US state capital after Phoenix, Arizona, and Austin, Texas. While the Columbus metropolitan area, with an estimated 2.23 million residents, is the largest metropolitan area entirely within Ohio. Nicknames for the city have included the Discovery City, Arch City, Cap City, Cow Town, the biggest small town in America, and Cebus. From the point of view of today's story, Columbus is also home to Ohio State University's Medical Center. As it's known today, the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center is a multidisciplinary academic medical center located in Columbus, on the main campus of Ohio State University. The medical complex was renamed in 2012 in honor of Les Wexner, the then chair of the university's board of trustees and CEO of Limited Brands, who donated $100 million to the university and championed fundraising for its construction. More than 62,000 inpatients receive medical care annually, and the health system manages more than 1.86 million outpatient visits each year. But today we'll be looking at one of their most infamous alumni in the shape of Michael Swango. Michael Swango was born in Tacoma, Washington, and raised in Quincy, Illinois. He was the middle child of Muriel and John Virgil Swango. Swango's father was a career United States Army officer who served in the Vietnam War. He was listed in Who's Who in Government 1972 to 73, but ultimately became an alcoholic. Upon his return from Vietnam, John Swango became depressed, and he and his wife Muriel divorced. Growing up, Swango saw little of his father, and as a result, unsurprisingly, was closer to his mother. He was valedictorian of his 1972 Quincy Catholic Boys High School class. During high school, he played clarinet in the band. Not exactly relevant, but I like to give you more bang for your buck. Swango served in the Marine Corps, graduating from his recruit training at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego. He received an honorable discharge in 1980. He saw no action overseas during his service, but his training in the Marines left him with a commitment to physical exercise. When not studying, he was frequently seen jogging or performing calisthenics on the Quincy University campus. Swango graduated from Quincy as a summa cum laude and was given the American Chemical Society Award. Following his graduation, Swango went to medical school at Southern Illinois Medical School of Medicine. And it was here that certain behaviors could have been seen as red flags, and there were behaviors that would perhaps foreshadow what was to come. And this troubling behavior during his time at SIU did definitely cause people to take notice, because although he was a brilliant student, he preferred to work as an ambulance attendant rather than concentrate on his studies. A fascination with dying patients was observed during this time. Barely noticed at the time, many of Swango's assigned patients ended up coding or suffering life-threatening emergencies, with at least 5 of them subsequently dying. Swango's lackadaisical approach to his studies caught up with him just a month before he was due to graduate, when it was discovered that he had faked checkups during his OBGYN rotation. Some of his fellow students had suspected that he had been faking checkups as early as his 2nd year, but this was the first time he had been caught. He was very nearly expelled, but was allowed to remain when one member of the committee voted to give him a second chance. And at this time, a unanimous vote was required for a student to be dismissed. Even earlier, several students and faculty members had raised concerns about Swango's competence to even practice medicine. Eventually, the school allowed him to graduate 1 year after his entering classmates, on condition that he repeat the OBGYN rotation and complete several assignments in other specialties. Despite a very poor evaluation in his dean's letter from SIU, Swango gained a surgical internship at Ohio State University Medical Center in 1983, to be followed by a residency in neurosurgery. While he worked in Rhodes Hall at OSU, nurses noticed that apparently healthy patients began dying mysteriously with alarming frequency. Each time Swango had been the floor intern. One nurse caught him injecting some medicine into a patient who later became strangely ill. The nurses reported their concerns to hospital administrators, but were met with accusations of paranoia. Swango was cleared by a derisory and cursory investigation in 1984. However, his work had been so slovenly that OSU pulled its residency offer after his internship ended in June. Later it emerged that OSU officials feared that Swango would sue if he was fired without cause, and resolved to quietly push him out of the hospital as soon as possible after his internship ended. In July 1984, Swango returned to Quincy and began working as an emergency medical technician with the Adams County Ambulance Corps, even though he had been fired from an ambulance service in Springfield for making a heart patient drive to the hospital. Colleagues reported on his behavior as well as his morbid obsessions. Soon, many of the paramedics on staff began noticing that whenever Swango prepared the coffee or brought any food in, several of them usually became violently ill with no apparent cause. In October of that year, Swango was arrested by the Quincy Police Department after arsenic and other poisons were found in his possession. The main poison he used on his colleagues, at least, was an ant poison that contained arsenic.
The same sales clerk testified that from her personal experience, the 2 bottles of Taro ant killer that Swango allegedly purchased from her was an unusually large amount for a single purchase.
I walked in there and told the jailer who I wanted to see, and he said, well, I'll go get him. He said, I'll have to move this individual. And I turned around and looked, and it was Mike. He was sitting there, and I said, what are you doing here? And he says, he gave me the look, and he says, I don't know.
It was a chance encounter that brought Dan Cook and Michael Swango back together. Once Swango's teacher at Christian Brothers High School, Cook now practices law. He and Swango have prepared months for this trial, to be heard by Judge Dennis Cashman.
It was essentially a circumstantial evidence case. No one ever actually saw him put poison in donuts, or saw him put poison in iced tea, or saw him put poison in soda.
April 22nd, 1985. Cook was confident as the trial began. Swango's bench trial would come down to his testimony versus that of the paramedics. Though Swango maintained his innocence throughout, he might not have fully grasped who was really on his side.
Strangely enough, when you talk about the paramedics, he wanted me to call all the paramedics as witnesses for him. And, I think he began to realize finally that the paramedics weren't for him.
Well, their testimony was very compelling. It was very thorough. The things they had to say about Swango that were relevant and material to the case were so strange and unique, if you will, that it certainly had a ring of truth to it, because you wouldn't think anybody could make something up like that.
In his testimony recounting the 2 alleged incidents, Unmissig recalled 2 conversations he had with Swango. One in which Swango described the ultimate ambulance call he would like to make. He described that as a busload of children being hit head-on by a tanker truck full of gasoline.
Several of Swango's co-workers focused on the odd comments he would make about trauma and death while on the job. Swango played it off as gallows humor, simply his way of finding humor among the harsh realities of a taxing profession. Few, if any, bought it.
I knew that what he was saying kind of makes sense on the surface, but when you really unveil his character, he is a very dark individual.
Then came a major issue, which occurred months before the trial.
He goes to Florida. He comes back, early in January, and I'm sitting in the office to get a phone call. Mr. Cook, yes. I said, what is it? And he said, I want you to come out here right now.
Swango's apartment was crawling with red ants, reason enough for him to keep syringes full of ant poison, which investigators found upon searching his place. But it was apparent These ants weren't native to the area. Swango had brought them back from Florida.
In his defense, he's saying he has this pre-filled syringe and he's, injecting up into the air at these ants to kill them. But the reality is that we believe that was a vial for his next victim.
Judge Cashman was left with the decision, and on May 3rd, he ruled. Swango was guilty on 5 of 6 charges of aggravated battery.
When I determined the outcome, I was never any more certain of a guilty verdict than I was of that one.
The 5 sentences were served concurrently. The maximum stay the law would allow was 5 years. However, Swango only served 2.5, thanks to his good behavior as an inmate. In August of 1987, Michael Swango was a free man.
We were notified that, as victims, that he would be released, and you just don't know. I mean, we all started talking because I'm still working on the ambulance. What potentially, where does he go? Does he come back here to Quincy?
On August the 23rd, 1985, Swango was convicted of aggravated battery for poisoning co-workers. He was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. Swango's conviction led to recriminations at OSU. A scathing review by law school dean James E. Meeks concluded that the hospital should have called in the police, and also revealed several glaring shortcomings in its initial investigation of Swango. Nonetheless, it was another decade before OSU conceded it should have called in outside investigators. Prosecutors in Franklin County, Ohio, where Columbus is located, also considered bringing charges of murder and attempted murder against Swango, but decided against it for lack of physical evidence. In 1989, Swango was released from prison. He worked as a counselor at the State Career Development Center in Newport News, Virginia. However, he was forced out after being caught working on a scrapbook of disasters on work time. Swango then worked as a laboratory technician in Newport News for ATI Coal, which later became Vanguard Energy, a division of CITA Logistics. During his time there, several employees sought medical attention with complaints of persistent and increasing stomach pains. Around this time, Swango met Kristen Lynn Kinney, a nurse at Riverside Hospital. The couple fell in love and planned to marry. He was employed until 1991, when he resigned his position to seek out a new position as a doctor. In 1991, Swango legally changed his name to Daniel J. Adams and tried to apply for a residency program at Ohio Valley Medical Center in Wheeling, West Virginia. In July 1992, he began working at Sanford USD Medical Center in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. In both of these cases, Swango forged several legal documents that he used to re-establish himself as a physician and respected member of society. He forged a fact sheet from the Illinois Department of Corrections that falsified his criminal record, stating that he had been convicted of a misdemeanor for getting into a fist fight with a co-worker and received 6 months in prison rather than the 5 years for felony poisoning that he served. Most states will not grant a medical license to a violent felon, considering such a conviction to be evidence of unprofessional conduct. He forged a restoration of civil rights letter from Virginia Governor Gerald L. Baliles, falsely stating that Baliles had decided to restore Swango's right to vote and serve on a jury, based on reports from friends and colleagues that he had committed no further crimes after his misdemeanor and was leading an exemplary lifestyle. Okay. Swango established a sterling reputation at Sanford. However, when he attempted to join the American Medical Association, or AMA, it conducted a more thorough background check than Sanford, and they found out about the poisoning conviction. That Thanksgiving Day, the Discovery Channel aired an episode of Justice Files that included a segment on Swango. Amid the AMA report and calls from frightened colleagues, Sanford fired Swango. Kinney went back to Virginia soon afterwards after suffering from violent migraines. After she left Swango, the headaches stopped. Funny that. The AMA temporarily lost track of Swango, who managed to find a place in the psychiatric residency program at the Stony Brook University School of Medicine in New York. His first rotation was in the internal medicine department at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northport, New York. Once again, his patients began dying for no explicable reason. 4 months later, Kinney died by suicide, and arsenic was found in her body at the time of her death. Kinney's mother, Sharon Cooper, was horrified to find out that a person with Swango's history could be allowed to practice medicine. She contacted a friend of Kinney's who was a nurse at Sanford, who in turn alerted Sanford's dean, Robert Talley, to Swango's whereabouts. Talley in turn telephoned Jordan Cohen, the dean at Stony Brook. Under intense questioning from the head of Stony Brook's psychiatry department, Alan Miller, Swango admitted he had lied about his poisoning conviction in Illinois. He was immediately fired. The public outcry resulted in Cohen and Miller being forced to resign before the end of the year. But before he resigned, Cohen sent a warning about Swango to all 125 medical schools and all 1,000 teaching hospitals across the US, effectively blacklisting Swango from getting a medical residency at any American institution. Since the latest Swango incident took place at a Veterans Affairs facility, federal authorities could get involved. Swango dropped out of sight until mid-1994, when the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, found out he was living in Atlanta and working as a chemist at a computer equipment company's wastewater facility. Soon after the FBI alerted the company, Swango was fired for lying on his job application. The FBI obtained a warrant charging Swango with using fraudulent credentials to gain entry to a Veterans Affairs hospital. But by that time, Swango had fled the country. In November 1994, he settled in Zimbabwe and used forged documents to obtain a job at Nyenye Lutheran Mission Hospital in the center of the country. Again, his patients began dying mysteriously. As a result of suspicions of Dr. Christopher Zishiri, the medical director there, Swango was suspended. But because of the failure to perform adequate autopsies, no firm conclusions could be drawn. But we know he did it, didn't we? Yeah, we do. During his suspension, Swango hired lawyer David Coulthard to enable him to return to clinical practice. He also appealed to the authorities at Mpilo Hospital, Bulawayo, to allow him, in the interim, to continue working voluntarily there. However, this was opposed by Abdullah Mesbah, a surgical resident, who had often found him snooping around mysteriously in the wards and in the intensive care unit, or ICU, even when not on call. He had suspected that sudden deaths of some patients were due to Swango, but he had no firm proof at that stage. At this time, Swango rented a room in Bulawayo from a widowed woman who subsequently became violently sick after a meal she had prepared for herself and a friend. The woman consulted a local surgeon named Michael Cotton, who suspected arsenic poisoning, and persuaded her to send hair samples for forensic analysis to Pretoria in South Africa. These clippings confirmed toxic levels of arsenic in the hair. The lab reports were passed on by the Zimbabwe Republic Police Criminal Investigation Department through Interpol to the FBI, who subsequently visited Zimbabwe to interview Cotton and the pathologist in Bulawayo. And this was a man named Stanford Matthey. In the meantime, Swango had sensed that authorities were closing in on him. He crossed the border to Zambia and subsequently to Namibia, where he found temporary medical work, always a good sign. He was charged in absentia with poisonings. In March 1997, he applied for a job at the Royal Hospital in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, using a false resume. While this was happening, Tom Valerie, Chief Inspector for the Office of Inspector General of the Department of Veterans Affairs, VA, consulted with Charlene Thomason, a forensic psychiatrist. And because of her considerable clinical expertise, Thomason was able to review documents and evidence and give a criminal profile of Swango, along with her assessment of why he had committed such crimes. Valerie was called by the FBI to discuss holding Swango. He called Richard Thomason, who was stationed in the DEA's Manhattan field office, to discuss the case. The conversation focused on Swango lying on his government application to work at the VA, where he prescribed narcotic medications. There was enough evidence for the Immigration and Naturalization Service agents to arrest Swango in June of 1997 on a layover at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, where he was on his way to Saudi Arabia. Faced with hard evidence of his fraudulent activities and the possibility of an extended inquiry into his time in Zimbabwe, Swango pleaded guilty to defrauding the government in March of 1998. In July of 1998, he was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. The sentencing judge ordered that Swango not be allowed to prepare or deliver food or have any involvement in preparing or distributing drugs. Although the FBI, the VA, and prosecutors for the Eastern District of New York were convinced that Swango was a serial killer, they knew it would be difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. They also knew that they had a limited amount of time to amass that proof, lest he be released from prison. Federal inmates must serve at least 85% of their sentences before being eligible for time off with good behavior, meaning that they possibly had only 3 years to prove that Swango was indeed a murderer. They feared that if they could not find enough evidence to convict Swango, he would likely kill again. Damn straight he would have. The government used this time to amass a dossier of Swango's crimes. As part of that investigation, prosecutors exhumed the bodies of 3 patients and found poisonous chemicals in all 3. They also found evidence that Swango had paralyzed a patient named Baron Harris with an injection of what was supposedly a sedative. The sedative caused him to lapse into a coma, and Harris died on November the 9th, 1993. Additionally, prosecutors found evidence that Swango lied about the death of Cynthia Ann McGee, a patient he treated during his internship at OSU. Swango claimed she suffered heart failure, but he had killed her by giving her a potassium injection that stopped her heart. On July the 11th, 2000, less than a week before he was due to be released from prison on the fraud charge, federal prosecutors in the Eastern District filed a criminal complaint charging Swango with 3 counts of murder and 1 count each of assault, false statements, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. At the same time, Zimbabwean authorities charged him with poisoning 7 patients, 5 of whom died. A week before the complaint was handed up, FBI agents interviewed Swango in prison. They told him that on the day he was due to be released, he would be extradited to Zimbabwe to face charges of murder and attempted murder. Knowing that he would likely face the death penalty for his crimes in Zimbabwe, Swango began talks for a plea agreement. Eventually, prosecutors agreed to not pursue the death penalty or extradition in return for Swango accepting a sentence of life in prison without parole. Swango was indicted on July the 17th, 2000 and pleaded not guilty. Because of course he did. But on September the 6th, he pleaded guilty to the 3 murder counts, as well as counts of wire fraud and mail fraud, before Judge Jacob Mishler. At his sentencing hearing, Swango admitted to causing 3 murders, lying about his role in causing a false death, and lying about his 1985 conviction. Prosecutors read passages from Swango's notebook, describing the joy he felt during his crimes. Judge Mishler sentenced Swango to 3 consecutive terms of life without parole. He is incarcerated at ADX Florence, where he was sent at his own request. He had been stabbed by another inmate while serving time for lying to the VA and fearing he would be attacked again if he were placed in general population. The FBI believes he may be responsible for as many as 60 deaths, which would make him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history.
He grew up in Quincy. In 1984, he poisoned his co-workers there. In 1985, it's where a judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison. Michael Swango's story began right here in the Tri-States, but few could have ever guessed where it would end. Michael Swango's run came to an end in 1997. In 2000, he met his fate, life in prison here in Florence, Colorado. A 60 Minutes report from 2007 describes this supermax prison as a 21st century Alcatraz, where many inmates spend 23 hours a day locked inside their cell. It's home to domestic and foreign terrorists, spies, gang leaders, and a doctor from Quincy.
You know, a physician takes the Hippocratic oath, and you know he's vowed to to preserve and protect and provide the necessary means to sustain life. And here's this guy looking at that oath and just, basically burning it.
He violated not only the trust of the patients, but the trust of his co-workers, certainly.
30 years later, those whom Swango used in his games look back on the man they once called a co-worker.
I don't think there's ill will. I certainly believe that he's a sick individual, and that he does not have the ability to comprehend what he did.
I don't think there's any anger. If in fact our society let him out, then I think there would probably be more anger. But knowing that he's in a place that he'll never hurt anybody again, I'm good with that.
Time is slowly putting Swango's story to rest, but Judge Dennis Cashman feels he has a responsibility to speak up about his involvement whenever he's asked to serve the greater good.
I've always felt like it's old news, but at the same time, as long as it gets attention, it might help prevent something like this from happening again.
Many who knew him say he could have been great. Instead, 30 years later, what happens in Michael Swango's mind is still a mystery.
If you had a chance to be face-to-face with him today, what would you say to him?
Why? Why would you do this? What motivated you to hurt and kill people?
I know I wouldn't get any answers, but I'd have to ask the questions and try to find out what he was thinking, why he did what he did.
If you could be face-to-face with Michael Swango today, what would you say to him?
If I could see him today, what would I say to him? I suppose I would ask why. Because there has to be a reason to do things like this.
After watching these past 3 nights, you're probably thinking that the person you'd like to hear from the most is Michael Swango himself. However, to my knowledge, Swango has not granted an interview in a very long time. Twice, he declined my request for a face-to-face interview in Florence, Colorado. I also sent him a personal letter explaining what I would like to talk to him about and asking him to reconsider. He did not reply. It seems Michael Swango has nothing more to say. Only he knows how many people he killed, and only he knows why. That's all Michael Swango has left, the twisted answers inside a once brilliant mind, alone in a prison cell for the rest of his life.
And that was the story of Michael Swango. His actual name, as opposed to the several aliases he used at various times. He is unquestionably a monster. And his obsession with death and the process of dying mean he will always be a danger to other people. Given the high number of deaths linked to this cockwomble, it would be impossible to adequately profile all of them. And indeed, it is hard to determine which of them are actually his dubious handiwork. As such, I will just dedicate this video to all of those touched by the actions of this wank badger, and hope that Swango's incarceration provides a level of solace to surviving victims and family members. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. Don't forget that CrimeCon UK will be coming to Manchester in September, and I will be there, and you can be too. There is still time to get involved, and if you use my code CROWS, then you can get 10% off tickets. But with that said, I'm Steve. You can't see him, but Samson is just down here, laying flat out, being a lazy bastard. But in his absence, I will just say I'm Steve, and I'll see you when I see you.
say